What I want to speak about is how we take these ideas and start to put them into practice in our lives, in our communities, and how we can begin to build out a national strategy literally from the bottom up. So I have, over the last 20 years, found an organizing principle for behavioral change, which I call the social engagement network. And I want to speak to that and really unpack it a little bit. We've been seeing a lot of the theory, and all of the things that I've been hearing, to my delight, we have been integrating, and now it's nice to know there's so much good research backing up some of what we've done, and maybe some of this will help reinforce some of those ideas that have been shared. And I want to show what I think can be the full potential as we start to scale up behavioral change and community engagement in terms of what I call the reinvention of a city from the individual. So the big starting point of this journey for all of us, and the journey that I have taken, is the imagination. It's about creating cultures of innovation, specifically social innovation. And I feel we have a great opportunity in the climate crisis. The opportunity side of the climate crisis is that it forces us to reinvent how we think about our world, ourselves, our communities. We have to. We have to reinvent. So what you'll be seeing is a process that we've gone through over the last couple of decades to think in new ways, to put these ideas into practice. And so the big question, the obvious question, which I don't know that we've actually answered directly, is why bother? Why bother getting people to lower their carbon footprint? Isn't there an easier way? I mean, that's a lot of work. We've been hearing all the last few days how much effort this will take. Might there not be an easier way? Well, we hoped there would be an easier way by passing climate legislation. We found out, unfortunately, that seemed like the easier way, but in fact, we didn't get a lot of traction. But even if we had passed legislation, if you looked, the legislation, it still required people to make changes. Gave them incentives, but it still demanded they make changes. So we have to actually deal with getting people to change behavior. And one more thing. Here's where the payoff is and why behavior change is actually one of the places we really need to begin. Our research shows that 50% of America's carbon footprint is the residential sector. 50 to 90% of the footprint of a community is the residential sector. This is where the carbon is. This is the low-hanging fruit. And if you can scale up a community and scale communities, you actually have an intervention around the climate change issue. So how do we do it? How do we do it? Well, we've seen that there have been a number of strategies for how to get people to take on this issue: information campaigns, financial incentives, media campaigns, and now it's finally devolved to actual trying to get people to do behavioral change directly. Because what they found was that information campaigns don't actually change behavior, they create awareness. Financial incentives are not drivers fundamentally. We've learned that. They create value added, but that's not why people do this. So we actually have to figure out how to empower people. So where some people were running away, we were running towards this because we said, oh, we know something about empowerment. Let's see if we can take what we've learned and make an impact around this issue. And so cities and individuals, empowering them. How could we do that was the question that we set out. And we were looking for clues. And the biggest clue that we found early on was something that happened millions of years ago, which is the shift from the single cell to the multicellular organism. The most important innovation, some say, in the history of life. What does that portend for the human condition? What does that evolutionary knowledge portend for what it is that we can do to tackle this issue? We've now seen that 1 in 12 people is on Facebook. The phenomena of social networks is now fully part of our culture. Social networks is a foundational idea. And so our question was, how can we harness this evolutionary impulse for social connection to address the climate change crisis. And so what I'll be sharing with you is our 2-decade journey into the possible, what we've learned, and I'm going to fast forward, if you will, to the end of what we've learned and unpack later on some of the other benefits, but I'm not, unfortunately, having the time to tell you how we did all the learning, because as much as you'll see outcomes, it has been an iterative social learning experiment. More error than success most of the time, but we stayed with it long enough to gain some knowledge. So it began in 1992. We actually had begun our work prior to that when we learned that the single greatest cause of the deterioration of the global ecosystem was the unsustainable patterns of consumption and production in the industrialized countries, which is to say, how we live. If we are the problem, if we lived differently, we could be a solution. How do we get people to live environmentally sustainable lifestyles was where we began. That was the leverage point in industrialized countries. And we posited 3 questions for our learning experiment, if you will. Can we use the social engagement network framework to help people adopt environmentally sustainable lifestyles? Can we actually use this whole notion of social network, social community, that whole dynamic to get behavior change to happen? We had tried and observed that books that have been written, 50 Simple Ways, websites, even though they weren't very prolific at the time, were not getting much traction. Information wasn't changing behavior. We needed to find a better way. Will they sustain this behavior change? If we get this to happen, will there be recidivism? So you go through all this effort, but can it be sustained? Was the second key question we were asking ourselves. And the third one was, can we create a process that's replicable and scalable? Because one-off solutions aren't going to actually win the day. So those were the 3 questions. And I wrote a book called The Green Living Handbook. We made it very user-friendly. We found that too much information actually narrows people's willingness to act. So we made it playful. To Paul's point, it was family-friendly so that people would actually engage. My greatest compliment I got once was, "Oh, I can do that." So we tried to make this much simpler than just pounding people with lots of information. And we built this very coherent program in small groups we called eco-teams. And here's the results. I'm going to fast forward 10 years. And this is what we were able to achieve with 20,000 people participating. We were able to get substantive behavior change. And it was, at the time, and still is, some of the best data that we've seen on how to actually get this kind of data, this kind of result. What we found was that there's huge opportunities in the American lifestyle if you can get people engaged, and if you can bring them through a structured process of behavioral change. And one of the exciting points in that was that we were able to get 15% CO2 reductions without even really trying very hard. So we were able to get substantive behavior change, the first leg of our journey. The second was, can this behavior change be sustained? This was what many of the cities that hired us would ask us. And so we had 7 longitudinal studies done. One of them was a 2-year longitudinal study. What they found was that during the program, 24 behaviors were adopted, 21 were sustained 2 years later, and 3 new ones were added. One study said it was unsurpassed in changing behavior. We answered the question, would it be sustained over time? And then the third question, and this one I think has multitude of implications, was how do you get enough people to do it? How do you make this replicable? How do you make this scalable? And we tried a lot of platforms. We tried friends, we tried workplaces, we tried faith-based groups, we tried service clubs, and they all worked. But when we got to the neighborhood, specifically to the block level, we found that we had a set of co-benefits that really got people excited. And it was getting to know my neighbors. that is one of the missing ingredients in our quality of life right now. We don't have access to the people who live literally right next door to us, and we would like that if given a chance, we discovered. Making my block a more livable place, healthier, safer, friendlier. And we found this notion of intergenerational equity as a key driver, doing it for the sake of my children. So here's how it worked. After lots of trial and error, one grant we got from a foundation to market test this idea, we did focus groups all over the country, and we came up with this script. Hi, I'm your neighbor from up the street. I'd like to, knocking on the door, pointing to your house, by the way, if appropriate. I'd like to invite you to a neighborhood gathering this Thursday night, 7 to 9:30, to hear about a program sponsored by, and the name of the city, to learn how to better conserve resources for the sake of our children, get to know each other better as neighbors, and create a healthier, safer neighborhood to live on. Can you make it? 85%, well into the late majority level, said they were interested in coming. Half came, 75% joined, and we got a 25% recruitment rate. We had answered the third of our questions. And we did this in 25 cities, starting from Portland to Columbus to Kansas City, Missouri, the Show Me State. It didn't make any difference where we did it. We were getting approximately the same numbers. And that's because of the co-benefits. It wasn't just the environment and how these were communicated, and simply communicated on a doorstep by a neighbor who lived on the block. So one of those cities, Portland, Oregon, said to us, this sounds really exciting. We're really interested in the carbon issue. This is in 1999. Could you redeploy this methodology to address climate change? No one had ever done any straight-on climate change program before, and we said, let's try. Let's see how it works. And so I created another program called the Low Carbon Diet, and we tested it out in Portland, and here's what we got. We got a 22% CO2 reduction per household. We got a 41% take-up by block. We increased the take-up. We found that there was a hunger to act on this issue. It had a moral imperative that was much more profound than just living green. 2006 comes along, Al Gore wakes people up, discovers that people who he's trained, the 1,000 evangelists giving their slideshow, have as the first question that everyone asks, what do I do? Discovered that our program actually was an answer, and so they began to evangelize low-carbon diet as part of those slideshows. And as a result, as well as lots of word of mouth, some 300 US communities have picked up this program and are doing it at some level or other. And it's now spread to China and Japan and Korea and many other countries. And in fact, I was in China last fall addressing 17 mayors from the major cities whose major agenda is low-carbon cities. That's not on our agenda, but it's on their agenda, and they had to figure out how to engage the citizenry since it's so much of a piece of their footprint. So the learning continued, and we found an opportunity recently in San Antonio because of the $5 billion+ that have been given out in stimulus monies for retrofits. They asked us to help them figure out how to do some of that work. We completed our pilot. What they were finding in a lot of the research was a 2% take-up in getting people to do retrofits, which is not a market game-changing number if they're going to make any major impact on that. So they wanted to see if our program could change that. Could this social engagement network process begin to start to redirect some of what is currently seen as almost a dead end? Even though there's huge amounts of money, it's just so hard to get people to do this. And what we found was that we were able to get a 41% take-up. And that's compared to these very, very small numbers. And when we began to, and we didn't even actually tell people to do it. They just did it by virtue of the program itself. And what we found was that when we asked them what was going on, what happened, how did this happen for you, they said, in many different words, we now feel it's the right thing to do. We had engendered a sustainability ethic, which is very different than an energy efficiency or a saving money ethic. And so that sustainability ethic with the peer support system, with the whole process that had gone on by now, the social engagement network was able to get those numbers. And one last example I'll share with you that moves us afield to the inner cities of our country, and specifically the block that I live on. One of the opportunities that started happening for these blocks and these neighborhoods was, okay, now I'm living more sustainably, or I'm living with a low carbon footprint. What about the block that I live on? How could we make that more livable? And so Philadelphia, which originally brought us in to do our sustainability program, said, can you redeploy this, just like Portland did, around livable neighborhoods? And so we created a book we called the Livable Neighborhood Program. We customized it for Philadelphia. We integrated all the services that were going on that we're trying to get to the block from the city and the state. Ultimately, 25 different services were integrated. We made a deal with the city. They said, if you get people in these inner city neighborhoods where we deliver services but they're not sustained to do it, we'll prioritize service delivery. We started creating a new social compact. And here's the results that we got. We worked on 101 blocks, and these are some of the toughest blocks in Philadelphia, northern Philly, West Philly, places where there's high crime, blight, drugs. On average, we got a 61% take-up. So you can see the progression as it gets closer to home. 3 neighborhood improvement actions were taken over the course of the program. We delivered that X number of services. We created one-stop shopping. Instead of 25 services knocking on your door, we were able to deliver it through one platform. And through the hours that were volunteered to improve their block, we estimated about a $4,500 contribution of social capital was generated per block. So what was what I call the social DNA code? What allowed this to happen? What is the source that enabled this? And what you're seeing here is a couple of decades of learning. But the key is the right size group. 5 to 8 households was the number where you could get people connected. More than that, they couldn't really connect in a meeting. Less than that, it was too small to have a critical mass. Organized actions in recipes. Every action carefully thought out, and if possible, plugged into a service or a product that was available so that people can just make it easy to do. So we broke down livable neighborhood into greening and beautification, health and safety. We broke down low-carbon diet into behavioral change side, system changes, and so forth. So the other one we broke down to solid waste, water, energy, and so forth, the green living. A group process protocol, I skipped group to team. Creating a team, getting a group of individuals into a team, a purpose statement, responsibilities, team leadership, really creating a structure that can produce outcomes. A group process protocol. So we built notions of accountability, peer support, and feedback. People made commitments to their neighbors. The next meeting, they had to deliver against that. People held them accountable. Not that they forced them to do it, but they said, you wanted to do this, what can we do to help you actually accomplish it if they didn't, in fact, accomplish it? And then they got inspired by each other and what each person said. At the end of the meetings, everyone would make an agreement what they would do. The next meeting, they would come and they would either do it or they wouldn't, or they'd come out with other ideas. And we created support systems. Let's do this together. We can help you weatherize your house. And we created an expectation of performance. This was not a discussion group. This was about performance. Lowering your carbon footprint, 25%, or whatever the number would be. Creating our block to be more livable. They assessed what the livability issues were. They chose the actions. They worked together, and then they wanted to perform against them. So what we found is that when people went through this process, we got a 95% completion rate, and they started replicating their teams. So one of the ideas that really has sort of struck me recently about what our exploration looked like is an idea that came out of a book by Stephen Johnson. Do any of you know where good ideas come from? It's an absolutely fantastic book about the natural history of innovation. So we've been in the social innovation space now for a long time. What he's tried to do is to connect it with the natural system innovation. And I'll read this quote to you. because this is what I'm going to just close with, is these houses we entered. Think of a house that magically expands with each door you open. You begin in a room with 4 doors, each leading to a new door you haven't visited yet. These 4 doors are called the adjacent possible. The term was first coined by Stuart Kaufman, an evolutionary biologist. The path of evolution is a continuous exploration of the adjacent possible. What you saw was the adjacent possible for this platform. What I want to share with you now are some of the rooms that we began to explore of the social engagement network as a platform in its own right. So the first one I want to speak to is green economic development. What we found was that we were a demand-side intervention, and as we built demand for green goods and services, we built demand for green jobs, we built demand for green businesses, we built demand for a green economy. Many stories that show that, where businesses were now coming in to fill the needs. One company, Unilever, used eco-teams to do market research. The second was social capital. We were bringing people together, we were building community, we were learning how to cooperate, building collaboration. We built high-performance teams, teams that could be redeployed, such that they could produce significant outcomes. And many communities now began to use that. And social innovation happened. They would assess their impact, they would become literate, and new ideas were generated. Ideas on how to get someone onto public transit who've never been there before, walking someone to the bus stop, building bike repair shops on the block, just multitudes of social innovations. And lastly, we created what we called socially engaged citizens. They would volunteer to start their block program, they would become coaches, they would become political advocates, very common. Some of them are now mayors on city councils, on environmental advisory committees. They are now in the system, literate and committed, knowing it's possible. Many of them became social entrepreneurs, starting to take out some of the ideas that they discovered into the community. And many of them were civic leaders. So just to close, where is the adjacent possible for this right now? The big ideas we're exploring are 3. One is we're looking to work with 5 cities, we call them the 5 sacred mountains, that are willing to, that's a Chinese term for how they do diffusion strategies, to get 25% participation, 25% carbon reduction, 75% participation rate, and carbon neutrality. So we're looking for cities that want to push the envelope of what's possible. And we've chosen our first one, Ithaca, New York, and we're looking now at a bunch of others. We're now been invited to do a proposal for a consortium of 25 foundations that want to build a retrofit market, and they need to figure out how to build the demand. And lastly, we're working with the American College and University Presidents' climate commitment to build out a whole youth movement to do the organizing. And I might add, in the first one, we're working with ICLEI, U.S. Green Building Council, and American College and University Presidents' climate commitment. So this is what's possible. This is what's possible. We can get behavior to change. We can get the blocks more livable. We can begin to build citizen capacity. We can get government and citizenry playing together. And we can start to build our communities, literally from the bottom up. So I will close with this wonderful Rilke quote that is sort of my mantra, and I think our mantra. It's the answer to the question, can we change the world? I'm a believer that we can. I see it happening around me a lot, and believe in our capacity. Again and again in history, some people wake up. They have no ground in the crowd, and they move to broader, deeper laws, which you've been learning over the last few days. They carry strange customs with them and demand room for bold and audacious action. Again, we saw some of that this morning. The future speaks ruthlessly through them. They change the world. So, thank you.